All right. Hello, everyone. So, this is week three of the Rome class. And so, to refresh you guys, last time we talked about the conflicts of the orders, which is about 2 centuries of a very, very, very slow back and forth over getting the plebeians political rights. Then we talked about the rise of the nobiles, as in the very rich and powerful families that could be both plebeian or patrician. Then we talked about the 2 temples that were built, the Temple of Concord, which is still not yet built, and then the Temple of Ceres, which was, I guess, like as one of you put it, the Temple of Demeter, put atop the Aventine Hill, the symbol of the plebeians. Um, then we also talked about the introduction of 2 assemblies, the tribal assembly, based on where you live, and then the plebeian assembly, based off of just like democratic, how many votes yes, how many votes no. We also talked about the tribunes of the plebs, as in the defenders of the people, who were tasked with protecting the interests of the plebeians as a whole. But as the nobiles are the new rulers, not the patricians, it means that the tribunes of the plebs might not really be the true defenders of the people, at least yet. We also talked about the expansion of Rome through establishing colonies and by giving pretty generous rights to all the people that they defended, that they defeated, turning them from enemies into partners. Then we got into Carthage, Rome's big final boss, or not really final boss, but big boss, where uh, which was an oligarchy, as in it was ruled by a small group of rich old men whose main job was to just make a lot of money through trade. Um, we also talked about the First Punic War, the first war against Carthage, which was 23 years of the Romans just throwing fleets at the Carthaginians, losing those fleets in battle, but occasionally winning, and occasionally losing their fleets in storms, until they finally ground Carthage down into accepting a kind of division of influence between the Romans in the northeast and then the Carthaginians in the southwest. So what a sphere of influence is basically like, um, maybe Carthage will say, okay, we're gonna let you guys take over everything west of this river. I mean, everything east of this river, while we'll take everything west of it. So, well, just at like a very basic level. And so the Romans should not be allowed to be able to intervene on anything happening on the Carthaginian side of this river. And well, they do. It's the start of the Second Punic War, which happens like around, I think, 20 years after these, or 10 to 20 years after the First Punic War. Is very The start of this war is very dumb, in the sense that um, they divided the Mediterranean into all of these spheres of influence. But Rome was taking this treaty that they'd had with a lot of asterisks, where they kept on infringing on the Carthaginian sphere of influence. And when Carthage attacked a city in Spain that had diplomatic relationships with Rome, Rome uses that as an excuse to go fight Carthage for a second time. This is a bad idea, is a very bad idea, because the Romans had thought that they could easily beat Carthage. I don't know why they thought they could do that after the experience of the First Punic War, but they did. And they were extremely, extremely wrong. This is going to be the closest thing to the Roman Republic being destroyed in pretty much its entire history, actually. Like basically all the way up until 476 CE, if you have seen my world history class. Hmm. So, also another thing about the Second Punic War is that since this is Rome's like existential struggle against its great enemy, is that this is actually why we think that Rome was founded in 753 BCE, because the people who were originally setting up, like trying to guess when when their city was founded, they decided that their city had to be as old as the great rival Carthage, because well, they'd thought at the time that all of Roman history up until the Second Punic War had been a lead up to it, which might not be which is, I guess, kind of arbitrary. You can't really tell, but it just gives you an idea of the kind of importance that the Romans gave this war. So this dude right here with the eye patch is Carthage's main general, Hannibal Barca. He is brilliant. He goes through the mountains. So the thing is, at the start of the war, Hannibal's army is in Spain. To get to Italy, they have to cross through the Alps, or they have to go south of the Alps, basically to get into Rome. I mean, to get into Italy. But all of the Roman armies are blocking Hannibal's army in the south, and the Romans think that no one can get through the Alps during winter. Hannibal goes through the Alps during winter, which is a very, very brutal march. It's like over, I think, like 12 days. Hannibal's army loses around half of its men and almost all of its war elephants. But when they reach the other side, Hannibal manages to sneak attack the Romans and defeat two Roman armies, including, I think, both of the consuls, both of the Roman presidents in battle. Yeah, Ticinus and Trabia. And so you can kind of see how this well, you can see Hannibal's route, where you see the Roman armies are down here, so he just goes around them and hits the weaker Roman armies while they're up here in the north. And so you can see that this war is actually fought on well, several different fronts. There is the Italian front against Hannibal, but in the west, there's also a Roman invasion of Spain, which is at the time controlled by the Carthaginians. So the whole reason why the Romans go to Spain is because they also want to fight on the offensive, and they lose pretty much every battle they fight against Hannibal. So they think the best way to beat the Carthaginians is to not fight Hannibal and instead fight all of the other generals, which is what they do. This actually goes kind of well at first, where the Romans and the Carthaginians slap at each other for like 8 years, but in the end, the Roman army gets surrounded at this place called Bacula, and the entire Roman army, including both of its commanders, are killed. So the importance of Bacula is because both of these commanders are Scipiones. They're members of the Scipio family. There's, I think it's Publius Scipio and probably a second Publius Scipio, since the Romans aren't very creative with their names. But anyways, these two guys are brothers. One of them will have a son, also named Publius Scipio, who will later be known as Scipio Africanus. But the whole reason behind like mentioning this war in Spain, though, is because you can tell that Spain is very far away from Italy, and it's not like you can go in the age before like planes between Spain and Italy very easily. So the armies that the Romans have to send to Spain have to stay there for the entire war. And as if you remember, like the first 2 weeks, the Roman armies are a bunch of soldier farmers, as in they should be able to be going home every year to go tend to their crops, but they're not. Meaning that while they're in Spain, all of their farms are falling into ruin, at least the farms that Hannibal isn't burning down in Italy. Also, for the Roman troops in Spain, they're supposed to be getting paid to make up for this, but since Hannibal is like right there in Rome, the Roman authorities in Italy are not. They think that might be a little bit less important, so pay is oftentimes late, or it just doesn't come at all. It's also considered a suicide mission to be going to Spain because after Bacula, uh, well, basically the entire Roman force sent to Baecula had either been killed or captured, so no one really wants to go to Spain. And the only person who volunteers ends up being the son slash nephew of the two generals who were killed at Baecula, Scipio Africanus. He's not yet Scipio Africanus, though, because Africanus is, you can probably tell, a nickname. So So Scipio takes an army, a very small army that actually just really doesn't want to come along with him, to Spain. And, well, he goes to Spain, and, well, he will actually end up doing a very, very good job. So, but I guess before Baecula, before Scipio goes to Spain, is the Battle of Cannae. Canny is well, there is no like modern equivalent for just how much of a disaster Canny is. Because well, Hannibal had defeated two Roman armies at Ticinus and Trebia. Actually, you don't really need to know those, but then he'd also defeated in the next year another big Roman army at Trasimene. And I think he at this point he has killed three of Rome's presidents in 2 years, which is crazy. So in 216, Rome goes into emergency mode. It sends both consuls, so both presidents, and the largest Roman army in history up to that point to fight Hannibal. This is 80,000 soldiers, practically all of these Roman soldiers who are under arms right now, and they send them to fight Hannibal's much smaller army. But Hannibal, through a lot of like very smart things, manages to bait the Romans into a trap and ends up killing or capturing 60,000 Roman soldiers, which is, for comparison, well, among the dead and captured was 1/3 of the entire Roman Senate, and also 1/5 of Rome's entire military-aged male population, which is, well, like it's like today, if this were like America, with like in the day, um, with those kinds of proportions, that would be like millions of people. Uh, just the sheer number of dead alone in this single day is more than all of the American dead during the war in Vietnam. So, yeah, it is bad. But the thing is, Rome doesn't give up. Rome is almost like an anime character. The more you beat it, the stronger it gets. Because the thing is, Rome has been treating its allies pretty well. And so the allies don't want Carthage to rule over them. They want to keep Rome, so only a single Roman ally actually deserts after the Battle of Cannae or Cannae, meaning that Rome still has the Italians. And with the Italians, it means that Rome has the power to raise more soldiers, more armies, and eventually be able to grind the Carthaginians down. But with all these massive losses at Cannae, the Senate now needs to replace the third of the Senate that it had just lost in a single day. And what they start doing is they start allowing people who otherwise would have, well, who they would have not ever been like seen in the same room with, a bunch of outsiders, and also a bunch of just young nobles who are going to have their careers super duper fast tracked by by the disaster. So the outsiders are called novus homo. You know, like Homo sapiens, as in like human beings. Novus means new, and homo means man. So these are the new men. The reason why this is so important is because Novus Homo are actually going to play a very major role in the later Republic, and it's something that you'll actually be seeing like over and over through Republican history, where every time there's a disaster, it shakes everything up, and a lot of people who normally would not have the opportunity to rise to power do. To replace the fifth of the Roman male population that died during Cannae, the Senate lowers the property requirements for the army so that they can start getting all these poor people to help provide more bodies to throw at the Carthaginians, and to make sure that these soldiers have some like ability to actually serve as soldiers before they inevitably end up getting killed in Spain. The Senate starts buying a lot of equipment for these poor soldiers, which are paid for by some of Rome's first taxes. If you guys remember the my world history lecture where I talked about it being very expensive to train new Roman soldiers during the Empire, well, that's not really the case during the Republic, because during the Republic, the Roman army isn't a professional army yet. This is kind of some of the first steps to actually producing the professional army. Because if you remember, before Cannae, people had to buy their own equipment. But during the Punic Wars and also during the Pyrrhic War from last week, the Romans have to start making their army more and more professional, where they have to pay for equipment for soldiers who can't afford their own, and then also just pay them because they don't have their own kind of income. And so Rome starts raising some of its first taxes. Uh, the thing is, the reason why this whole early republic can actually absorb the loss of Cannae, while the empire actually won't be able to survive these kinds of disasters later on, is because the entire Roman population, all of Italy, is going to be dedicated to the singular goal of defeating Carthage. There aren't going to be a bunch of extra fronts that they have to defend. The only war they have to fight, the only issue of their generation, is going to be Carthage. So 2/3 of men, or as in Italians and Romans, ages 16 to 48, with basically any property at all, are going to be serving continuously for the next 9 years of fighting in both Italy and Spain, which means you basically mobilized like the whole Roman citizenry into all fighting a single war. And also, just another thing about this is that Kenny, with all of this, is actually something that was entirely avoidable, and it was mainly the result of a lot of Roman incompetence. So after the Battle of Cannae, Rome starts changing its strategy, where they're not going to be fighting Hannibal head on, but then they're going to be fighting all the other Carthaginian generals in Spain. Also, this dude, Scipio Africanus, well, I guess I've already kind of introduced him, but when he actually served as a soldier at both Trebia and at Cannae. So he had been a soldier in two armies that had both been super duper destroyed by Hannibal. But after Cannae, he is, well, the son of and the nephew of Rome's two best generals at the time, the two Publius Scipios. And so he's kind of like a rich kid. All this enemy, all of the old generals are kind of dead. So, except for his family members, really. So he gets to get a little army command in Spain after a few years. And basically, the whole reason why he can actually become so famous in Roman history is actually because so many of the older senators were dead, because he at this point is very young, and under normal circumstances he'd have had to wait 10 or 20 years before he could get any kind of army command. So okay, after 11 years of very slow fighting and a lot of help from Scipio Africanus, Rome eventually just grinds Carthage down because it can just keep throwing armies at Carthage, while Carthage, on the other hand, just wanted to make a bunch of money. They didn't want to do any of this. The only one who really had any motivation to actually beat Rome had been Hannibal, because his dad had actually been one of the generals who'd fought against Rome during the First Punic War, and so he has a family vendetta against Rome. But the rest of Carthage doesn't really care. They just want to make money. So they eventually they do have to give up after Scipio Africanus beats Hannibal in battle, which is quite the achievement. And so Carthage at the end of this basically gives up its like whole empire to the Romans, and then it also destroys basically all of its ships and gets rid of its military or its army. So now that the Senate, now that Rome has won, so the Rome now looks very different now, since well, it's been if you remember the last couple lectures, the highest authority in Rome before had been the consuls, but they only have 1 year terms, and the assembly is too big to be able to coordinate a kind of war. So the Senate becomes the big power in Rome because this is the group that needs to coordinate the whole Roman strategy to ensure that Hannibal gets defeated or the Carthaginians get defeated. And so the Rome becomes much more oligarchical as a result of this, as in like a small group of people start getting all of the power. If you remember the first week of this, where I talked about monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, the balance between the three in Roman politics. Well, this kind of overturns that balance. Now the democracy part, the assembly, now feels very left out of power, and that resentment over this is going to boil over in a big way over time. Also, another way that Rome starts looking more and more like Carthage is the fact that its army starts becoming, I guess, less and less of the old soldier farmer ideal. Because these soldiers had been fighting and they'd been away from their farms for years. And that meant that, when you haven't been taking care of your farm for years, that means that, it's going to fall into ruin. So let's say that you are a Roman soldier who has just spent, say, like 8 years in Spain. So, I guess you've risked your life repeatedly. You've, uh, you've seen basically like all of your friends die. So you come home and you come back to your town and you find that it's been burned to the ground by Hannibal's army, or it got burned down to the ground by a Roman army after it surrendered to Hannibal. And so Uh, what are you gonna do? Your home is gone. Probably everyone you know is gone. So how are you gonna survive? To maybe you'll just sell your farm to a senator, because what else are you gonna do? You don't have enough money to be able to actually rebuild it, and so maybe you'll just become a laborer back on your own farm. But also, you might think that since your pay has been off all this time from the Senate, during your fighting in Spain, maybe you really deserve some extra money, some extra land as a reward for your service. So you have to turn to your commander, because your commander's whole job is to look out for their soldiers after the war ends. And that means that soldiers now who've lost basically, who have nothing to lose at this point, now have much more loyalty to the commanders who they had fought for 8 years, 11 years, than to the actual city of Rome. And this is also just because the army is becoming more professional, because now they're not fighting because they want to protect their property, as in their farms, but they're fighting because, that's how they're getting paid. This is their job now. They look very much like the old Carthaginian mercenaries who they used to fight. This is also going to be a very, very bad development as things continue. Because even though it'll make the army much stronger because they're going to be professionals, um, this isn't going to be a Roman army anymore. It's going to be a series of generals' armies. So, what are you going to do with this massive number of a bunch of just homeless, very angry, probably extremely traumatized soldiers after winning the war? Maybe you're gonna want to use them on someone else so that they don't get bored and use their swords on you. And just look over to the east, because the successors of Alexander the Great, if you remember those from my world history lecture, well, if you don't aren't in my world history lecture, these are the kingdoms that form after Alexander the Great's death. And all of these kingdoms have been fighting each other for, well, a couple of generations. And their armies are all kind of weakened by fighting each other, and they're all disunited. But the big thing is that they're extremely rich. Since I don't think I have a picture. If you remember, the Eastern Mediterranean is a place that is very good for trade because there's all these islands, there's all this coastline, so it's very good for all this sea trade, which is helps makes everyone richer. And then it's also just very old. There have been cities there for thousands of years, so there's been a lot of wealth that's been built up over time. And that means that all these, poor homeless soldiers now are looking at this very, very underdefended Greek East with some, well, like dollar signs in their eyes. And well, these Roman soldiers been through quite a lot. And at this point, I think they'd be very much like, if we looked at them today, they'd probably be considered psychopaths. But yeah, they don't really care about like doing good things or bad things anymore. And so they go through Greece and Macedonia, like Alexander's old empire, and they just slap aside every army that comes to in their way. Since, well, they've been fighting for 11 years, they know how this all works. They uh it's very brutal, where I guess you can kind of see in this picture where the Romans, well, like either burn or steal everything that isn't nailed down, including people, because this is like the real beginning of just a huge amount of slavery that's going to kind of define the history of Rome. Uh, in one instance, they'll slave basically like around half the population of an entire country, which might be a bit of an exaggeration from our sources, but it is bad. Um, they destroy a bunch of these cities that have stood for thousands of, since the Bronze Age collapse, and well, they get very rich, but at what cost here? And also, the people who are really getting rich, though, are the senators who are commanding these armies, because they all get a huge amount of all of this loot and stuff that's just being stolen. Also, I guess another reason why the senators make so much money is because, um, because they do a very, very, very bad job of running this new empire, where it's all based around profit. Because Rome was not ready to control this much territory. It didn't have a bureaucracy. It doesn't really have like a city, way to govern all of these places. They set up provinces, but then they don't have an administration ready for these provinces. So what they do instead is they turn to private corporations, which is a very, very bad idea, because, well, the goal of these private corporations is to make profits, not necessarily to do good government. And so these corporations are called the publicani. And so the idea of how the publicani work is the Senate holds a auction to see who gets the contract to tax the province or all these conquered territories for, say, 10 years. All of these corporations bid on it. So whoever pays the highest amount gets gets the job. And they get contracted to tax, like, to get as much tax as possible out of the locals. But they get let's say like maybe this area should get like 100, let's say 1,000 pounds of gold. So the publicani go in, they take the 1,000 pounds of gold from the locals, and then, well, here's the thing. They just paid, say, 100 pounds of gold to be able to get this contract. So then they tax the locals for another 100 pounds of gold so they can make up their loss. But also, they want to profit. They want to make money out of this. Otherwise, what's the point of the whole thing? So they tax another 1,000 pounds of gold just for themselves. And as you can tell by paying more than twice the number of taxes than you really should be, uh, this is going to get very bad. And the reason why the Romans don't crack down on this is because, well, this corporation now has 1,000 pounds of gold that they can use to pay off anybody who might want to crack down on them. Uh, because the thing is, all these senators and these governors of these provinces are theoretically or legally not allowed to invest in one of these corporations. But, well, they do on the down low. They invest into the publicani, and also the companies pay very, very hefty bribes to ensure that everything is nice and legal. Well, I mean, you can tell this is totally unsustainable. And this also opens up a whole new way to do politics. Because what you can basically do is, if you're an ambitious young noble, you can borrow a ton of money and then use that to get a very spectacular entry into politics. You can bribe a bunch of people. You can start paying a bunch of people to start buying votes. You can hold a bunch of games, very expensive games, to make sure that the people stay on your side. And then once you get elected, you can, after that, become a provincial governor. And then once you're a governor, you can start raising taxes in the province. So let's say the Publicani now should get raising, say, 2,500 pounds of gold rather than 2,100 pounds of gold. And those extra 400 pounds of gold just all go to you, because you have bribed a bunch of people to get elected. You have a lot of debts to pay. So you use the money that you steal from the locals to pay the people that you were borrowing that money from. Uh, and then you can also just, make a handsome little profit on the side. So that brings us to this dude, Marcus Aquilius, because he's one of these provincial governors, and he has a lot of debts when he comes in. So he accepts a lot of bribes once he becomes governor. So the Roman Senate holds they recognize that he is being bribed. So then they hold a trial to see, okay, what should we do with him? Is he guilty of bribery? He is completely guilty of bribery. But the thing is, he has all this money from getting bribed. So he takes the money that he got from being bribed and uses that to bribe the jury in a case about his bribery, which is smart and it works. He literally bribes his way using bribe money out of his bribery charges. And this is actually kind of normal for Rome at this point. So, and you can tell that this is a very, very, very ruinous. Because the thing is, provincial governors only are there for 1 or 2 years. So after the governor leaves, you get a whole new guy with all of their own new debts that they have to pay, and the whole thing repeats all over again. Only this time, you have less money to pay all these things off. And if you don't have enough money, what's going to happen to you is maybe they'll steal your farm. Maybe they'll kidnap your family in order to make you have to pay. Maybe they'll beat you until you come up with money to pay. Maybe they'll murder you, and maybe they'll sell you into slavery. Yeah, it's bad. it's it's very bad. So, let's say there's Manius Aquilius again, and he comes home with all this money that he's taken and stolen and gotten out of bribery. And so, what is he going to spend that on apart from bribing the corruption jury? Well, he's going to spend it on clients. And what a client is someone who basically puts themselves under the protection or the influence of a person in exchange for money. Because, like, well, there's a lot of poor Romans who need all this, who are just really need to get by. So, getting a bit of money every day from a powerful person, that could go a long way. Maybe that can help like pay to feed like your family or like your parents, things like that. So and then in exchange, what you do is basically you become like their big political supporter. You have to vote for them in like all their elections, or you have to vote for people that they tell you to vote for. You have to, in whenever they make a speech in the assembly, you have to like clap, cheer, bring signs, bring your friends, all that kind of stuff. And maybe, just maybe, if your patron is a bit more unsavory, maybe you join their gang. That is going to be very big as we go into our story. Another thing, though, about these clients is that you don't have to be just a poor person to be a client. You could be a young, ambitious noble who wants to make their way in politics, but they don't know anybody. They need connections. So what you do is maybe you find you go to the Scipio family, because the Scipios have a lot of clients, because, well, fighting Carthage was basically their family business for an entire generation or two generations. So, and well, they're very popular. They've made tons of money off of the war with Carthage. So they have they can have a lot of money to throw around, and what they have also is a lot of political alliances. And so if you become a client to the Scipios, then you get access to those alliances. So let's say if you want to run for, let's say, the quaestorship, one of the lower ranks in Roman politics, then, well, uh, the Scipios are going to vote for you. They're going to get their patrons to vote for you, and maybe they're going to get their allies and their clients, and then maybe they're going to get their allies and their clients to vote for you. And so then, well, you get your office. In exchange, once you are in office, then you kind of do the things that the Scipios tell you to do. So this means that a small group of families who have lots of clients are going to like have a very, very outsized influence in politics. This is more of that oligarchy part of the democracy, oligarchy, monarchy part of Roman politics. This is this is going to be kind of an issue later on. Also, just an example of like how crazy this eventually gets is near the end of the Republic, so around say 150 or 100 years after the fall, after the invasion of Greece. There's this dude named Pompey the Great. He is a big general, and he has actually managed to get several kings to be his clients. And what his clients' kings do here is when things start going tough for Pompey, he uses his clients to literally raise an army that's solely loyal to him from all of these client kingdoms. A Roman general leading a bunch of foreign armies that are only loyal to that general and not to Rome. Quite the bad development. So I guess I already talked about the Scipios, but there's another Scipio, not just the three Publius Scipios that we've talked about already, but Scipio Aemilianus. I think he's also named Publius Scipio because I think Aemilianus might be another nickname like Africanus was. So he is part of the obviously he's part of the Scipio family, and this means that he gets to be a very, very he gets to have a very easy political career because the Scipios have all these alliances, they have all these good clients. So the only thing that Scipio Aemilianus has to do before becoming the consul president uh, is hold a single office, and it's generally like a pretty minor office, really. Well, and then he also serves as a junior officer in Spain, not in the Punic War, but because now Rome is fighting in Spain, because they need to take control of the area now that they've like officially taken control of it from the Carthaginians. So Scipio Aemilianus is, the dashing young hero of the Roman people, where he is. If you remember, if you've ever read Heroes of Olympus in the second book in Son of Neptune, there's Frank Zhang, and he gets a medal for being the first one to get over an enemy wall. Well, yeah, Scipio Aemilianus also gets that, and that's actually a very dangerous thing, since usually the first one to get over the wall is going to be the first one to get shot full of arrows. He also so here he's pretty brave. He also rescues three entire battalions or three cohorts of surrounded legionaries in Spain from the local Spaniards, which is if you've ever watched 1917, that's kind of like that's a very similar number of soldiers, which is like a big deal. He also, in like a very popular story, actually like challenges a Spanish champion, some say a Spanish king, to fighting in single combat, a duel in front of both armies, and he wins, which is you know like he's pretty cool. So well, he becomes consul, even though he's actually too young to become consul. But just who cares? He saved 1,500 soldiers. Well, he gets a pass, and well, giving people passes this way is also going to be kind of an issue later on. He's also, though, very interestingly, he likes Greece a lot. He's actually the patron of the historian from whom we get a lot of our early history of Rome. If you know I've mentioned the democracy, oligarchy, tyranny thing, or monarchy, that like balance that Rome had. The whole person who originally formulated that was this historian Polybius, and Polybius and Aemilianus are actually I guess they're going to show up in our next slide because the Second Punic War is not the end of Carthage. It's the end of Carthage as like a real power, but the Romans they're kind of paranoid because Carthage, despite losing its army, its fleet, and its empire, now is just kind of gets to do what it always wanted to do, which is trade and make lots of money. Oh, well, at the start of this wasn't too big of a threat. Actually, probably wasn't like ever really too big of a threat. Uh, but they're getting super duper rich, and so Rome has been scared of Carthage, like given obvious reasons. So the Senate starts looking at Carthage getting wealthier and wealthier, and they start having flashbacks towards the two Punic Wars. Not only that, though, is the Senate really, really wants to make some cash because they're looking at all this wealth very, very greedily. And so, Carthage Rome follows in the long tradition of pretending that you're very obvious that your wars motivated by greed are actually defensive wars. So Carthage gets raided by a bunch of desert tribes, and so it raises a small army to go, help fight off against that. Rome looks at this and it's like, oh boy, it's time to get to war, and uses that as an excuse to declare war on Carthage, which is not it's not really a great excuse, but once they start wanting to have a war, there's not really a way you can stop them. And so the guy who's picked to lead this army to finally put the end to Rome's great enemy is Scipio Aemilianus. Well, he's too young, but no one really cares. And what he does is he takes his big army, a very big army, probably too big of an army considering that Carthage is literally just one city at this point, um, and surrounds Carthage. And over the course of 2 years, fights through the streets, puts it under siege, and eventually manages to take it and burns it to the ground. You can see in this picture that it is very brutal because, Carthage doesn't really have an army, and the people that are fighting the Roman soldiers and the people who are being killed by the Roman soldiers aren't soldiers themselves. They're just the people who are trying to protect their homes. Uh, it's said that if you remember Polybius, he was there because he followed Scipio Aemilianus around, And well, he and Scipio are said to have stood atop a hill and watched Carthage as it burned. Scipio is reported to have cried as he watched the city, and he said that he saw in the flames of Carthage, well, that one day his own city would meet a similar end. And he quoted Homer, if you guys are familiar with the Iliad. And he said, well, a day will come when sacred Troy shall perish, and Priam and his people shall be slain. Um, well, I guess like the whole reason behind this, the whole implications of this are like kind of very complicated. But just like if you want to know, like I guess why we should care about that today is because well, this is a very big insight, as in eventually, well, Rome falls. Eventually, well, nothing lasts forever, and eventually today America will fall, the West will fall someday, maybe humanity will fall, where well, time will takes down all things. And so, well, one day San Diego is going to be nothing but dust. So I guess you just want to like think about things as like everything that we build today is going to be well destroyed one day, and well, I guess everyone has to find out a way to deal with that. On a more cheerful note, uh, there is a soldier with, well, who at the wall. Well, there's a soldier who takes part during the Battle of Carthage. He he at this point is well kind of a young noble. He's very rich from a rich old family, and he's a dashing young officer, and he's a brave young officer. So he, like Scipio Aemilianus in Spain, is the first person over the walls of Carthage once the siege towers hit the walls, which is extraordinarily brave, and is going to mark this guy out to be a very, very big character in Roman history. This guy's Tiberius Gracchus. He's going to be the first of our main characters when we actually get into the storyline in 3 days. Sorry, 3 weeks. And, well, yeah, keep an eye out for him. Just think about this young soldier, because eventually he's going to shake the Republic to its very core. And so, well, that's as far as we got uh, this whole well yesterday on Friday. But yeah, there I have one more slide, but I think I'll be doing that next week. And so yeah, thank you for sitting through this. Well, I hope to see you like in class on Friday, and we'll have a nice day. Bye bye.